Fiction, science fiction, horror, fantasy, crime, LGBT, thriller.
You have now entered the House of Mystery.
Well, welcome back into the House of Mystery. I'm Al Warren. Mr. Joe Goldberg is in the house.
I'm in the house. I'm happy to be in the house.
No, you don't need to.
I could be. I've done it from not in the house before, and it's not quite as convenient as sitting here with my large beverage and my pen and my desk. Anything for the show.
Anything.
I do. I've done it from a gas station parking lot once. So.
Well, you've done a lot.
And that was back in high school. I don't want to talk about it, you know. There was no cameras in the parking lots back then. No, sorry.
No, that was before they did that sort of thing.
Surveillance, yeah.
Surveillance.
It's everywhere.
Well, speaking of that, now we've got a surveillance guy.
You're a lousy you're the worst segue guy.
Yeah.
In
Well,
Speaking of surveillance, let's talk about Matt. He didn't write about surveillance.
Yeah. Well, I used to do dirty segues. Now I'm trying to be nice, right? So
that's true. You can't do it. Give up.
Yeah. So
give us the old Al.
Yeah. No, I think so. I think pretty soon it's changing. But anyway, we've got a writer. Guess what? That's something different. No, his newest book, Other Than Honorable, and of course it's Matt Hardman. So thank you for being here.
I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, Matt, before we get into the book, let's talk about you. And you've got quite a history of, it's just quite a history. I'll just leave it at that. So let's talk about your history and how did you turn your history of being like in the Navy and all of this military and all this stuff into being a writer?
Oh, man. Well, should we start at the Navy?
Yeah. Well, no, just I think the idea is, were you thinking of it like when you were back in the Navy and working, and when you were doing different jobs that you had done? Was it in the back of your mind that I want to be a writer, or were you writing stories and you just thought one day you would write, or where did that pop up in this career?
I think it was probably always in the back of my mind. I had an older brother that used to try and get me to do these young author things when I was in like 4th and 5th grade. And yeah, so while I was in the Navy, I guess you could say I was maybe collecting stories that I could fictionalize later. Yeah, I kind of kept the idea that I could write. I don't think I actually scribbled anything down until my last couple of years on active duty. And then, even then it was just something to do. I don't think I ever consciously thought about maybe having a book running around the world, much less, a couple of them out there circulating.
Well, then what happened? What gave you the courage then, let's say, or the ability to also sit down and go, okay, I'm going to write and actually publish it, actually do it, rather than, in the sidelines?
I think it was actually a mistake. That sounds really bad.
Stand in the way. Yeah.
No, my last couple of years in the Navy, I started working hard on my bachelor's degree because, staring at retirement, I was like, yeah, okay, I need to get this done. And then I went looking for a master's program because I still had GI Bill left. And my employer was initially was like, hey, you need to get an MBA. And I applied to several schools. I got into the MBA program at Boston University, Hopkins, and a couple other places. Chose Hopkins because it was, an hour from my house. And, hated business. I absolutely hated business. But I was wandering around the campus one day and I ran into one of the writing professors, switched programs, and, at first it was kind of a lark, and then it was like, okay, maybe I can actually publish something. And, next thing I know, I get a short story picked up, and then I do my reading at graduation, and I get this email one day from Double Dagger Books, and it's like, hey, we heard you wrote a book. Can we see it? And one thing led to another, and now here I am 4 years later.
Yeah, there you go. You made it. Now this book here, what's the premise behind this book? Like, tell us the basic storyline of what's going on.
So I've always been a fan of the James Bond books. I loved reading those growing up. I think my dad handed me my first one when I was 10. And I always wanted to create a character that was kind of like James Bond. I played with the idea for a while I was at Hopkins, never actually did anything with it. And then I finally sat down and decided, this is what I'm doing right now. And so I've created this character as a disgraced Marine. He's looking at a long time in prison out in the brig out in Pearl Harbor for a variety of issues, whether they're real or made up, by the guy who's keeping him in the brig. And he gets rescued out of the brig by this shadowy pseudo-government organization and sent off to collect atomic weapon secrets from a contact in Berlin. And along the way, just like, kind of early Bond, he kind of gets himself into trouble, gets himself out of trouble, whether it's his own doing or some help that, is unforeseen. I wanted to kind of incorporate that and make my own little American version of a Bond universe and see what happened with it.
But this is set back in 39, right?
Yeah, this book takes place in roughly the week before the invasion of Poland, so the week leading up to September 1st, 1939, and then September 1st, 1939 is the kind of last day in the book.
So, every writer gets the write about what you know type of thing, but I don't think there was a lot of U.S. Navy shipbuilding stuff back in 1939 that you may have been actually actively involved in. So how did you use what you know now to make this thing, or did you just care at all? You just said, I'm not using my experience up to present day to that.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. So I actually, to kind of prep myself for this, I just started reading all the James Bond books cover to cover, and went scouring the internet for internet sites that talked about Ian Fleming and what Ian Fleming said on writing, and I finally came across this quote of his where he talks about how he never went back and read anything, or much less edited, until the entire book was done. And I was like, well, that's brilliant. Maybe I can do that. So I did that with this one, and then during the revision process is when I focused all the research on making sure, all the stuff I don't know, because none of this has to do with being on ships. That's where, the revision process and the editing process got really, hard and heavy. But the writing of the story, just creating the story, whether it was right or wrong for the first draft, I just followed Fleming's advice for that one.
But as an aside, Casino Royale, right? The best of the Bond books.
Yep, I love that book.
Making sure that you pick the right one. Yeah.
I have worn the cover off of mine.
Go ahead, Al.
Well, I was going to say 1939. Weren't you around then? He could have called you.
He was busy in the committee, 20, making things up. Or soon to be busy, Operation Mincemeat, stuff like that.
Yep.
Listen, so 1939. Is there a reason why you picked to go back to this time? Rather than 50s and 60s, is there something about that time area and Nazis and war that kind of, drew you there?
There wasn't at first. Originally I was just looking for some area in history that I could pinpoint as the starting point for Captain Frost's kind of origin story. And then I started realizing that, as I looked at, my old college textbooks for world history and, different timelines that I downloaded off the internet of events throughout World War II, that I could start kind of interlacing Captain Frost's story with real world events throughout, starting just prior to World War II and moving throughout. So there's actually a prologue for this book that starts in Shanghai 2 years prior in 1937, when the Japanese and the Chinese are battling at Suchow Creek, which it sets the story for why, the main part of the book opens with Captain Frost in the brig in Pearl. But I really liked that portion of history, and it became really simple for me to pick little points that, okay, for book 2, I can put him here doing this. And book 3, I'm trying not to give away too many details, but book 3, I can put him here doing this. I can move him around the world.
Well, what came first? This is a cliche question, but it is important when you're starting off with new characters. Did the character come first and who he was, or did the story come first?
The character came first this time, and the first set of notes that I wrote for him, I actually had him starting in the 80s. I had him starting in the 80s near Pripyat in Ukraine during the meltdown and explosion at Chernobyl. And then, the more I looked at it, the more I was like, well, that's not as fun a time frame for what comes after that, because we all know the next 5 years is okay, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse for the Soviets, and there just weren't enough, I guess, natural, well-known history points for me to build a book around. So I went looking, and I ended up in 1939.
So Captain Frost, explain that character. Who is that character to you?
So effectively what I did, like two of my favorite characters in thriller literature have always been Bond and then Jason Bourne. And I was really looking for something that was like a combination of the two, and I kind of built him based on, the idea that he's as smooth as both of those characters are supposed to be, except in one respect, where James Bond was always kind of smooth with the women. I chose to go the Jason Bourne route, where he's extremely awkward around women and he's focused solely on one. The hard part, I guess, when building him was trying to figure out from the get-go, how smart he might have to be to navigate the world that I'm going to throw him into.
So when you're writing that character, do you see your character, or do you feel them? Like, do you have a picture of who this person would look like, and kind of what's your relationship then when you write a character?
So I do. I actually, one of the first things I did after I kind of sketched the outline for this novel was I built a spreadsheet with kind of the short bio for every character in the book and who I saw when I pictured this character. And in this case, Captain Frost looks like about a 25-year-old Gary Cooper. And that's what I keep in mind when I'm writing his character.
And you hear his voice then, or how do you create the dialogue?
I do. I hear his voice, and I hear it the way he sounds in Pride of the Yankees, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
It cracked my dad up.
I'm an old movie buff too, so I'm flashing. I'm flashing to the movie. I was going to ask a question about the qualities of the new character you're building. There's a discussion out there about the flawed character or the perfect hero who can jump out of the 5-story building, bounce like a kangaroo, and just keep running, which was kind of what Bond was, right? Kind of what Bourne was. Do you want your guy to be the hero, that kind of never takes a bullet and he gets shot in his shoulder, just he brushes it off, or is this guy going to be does he hurt? Is he flawed? Is he human?
So in that respect, he's neither Bourne nor Bond. He's more like the Gray Man. He gets beat up, he gets roughed up, he gets cut up, he bleeds. He doesn't always have the perfect solution to a problem. And, in some cases, as I move through, book 2 and book 3, and even in book 1, readers will find out that sometimes he needs a lot of external help to get out of trouble. And that was, I guess that was the tertiary influence, was Mark Graney's Court Gentry. I don't like that idea. The toss the character into trouble and see what happens.
Story of my life.
Yeah.
So, is there a reason why you chose him to be kind of, let's say, as you describe, he's disgraced Marine? Like, is there something behind that?
There is. So I chose to build a twist. I'm not quite sure when I'm going to reveal it, whether it's going to be book 2 or 3. The backstory in the prologue for Other Than Honorable, the section at Suchow Creek, the events there, in this book as kind of a standalone, it gives the reason why we open on Captain Frost sitting in a Pearl Harbor brig and being subject to a kind of Captain Queeg-like commandant. But it also provides a little bit of, like, hey, there's something else here that readers will be able to look back and be like, oh, he did tell us that. When I get to who's really running the world, I guess along that lines you could think of, like, in the Bond world, it was always Spectre behind everything. Captain Frost might have his own version of Spectre kind of haunting him.
Well, that's where I was going to go, Matt. Nazis are Nazis, all right? They're the bad guys, They're,
yep.
But Bond had Spectre. Bourne has kind of his own self and the government. But who are your bad guys? Is there an individual bad guy, or are they just like Nazis?
Little of both. So Only a couple times in this book do you hear a vague reference to a group called Veil, Veil. It's the vanguard of espionage, infiltration, and lethality. It took us 15 days, myself and the editors at Double Dagger, to come up with something that sounded World War II-ish pulp fiction, but was a good acronym that was kind of overshadowing and dark. But he has Veil. Veil has, there's an entire worldwide organization that I've kind of hidden in this book, and, it'll come to the forefront as I move through Frost's exploits. And it is tied to his backstory. I guess I'll leave it there.
Well, are you going to tell us how it ends?
Yeah, come on, man.
I mean, I could.
Give us the secrets. What's the most damaging secret thing you can tell about your book that would ruin it for everybody else? Just tell us that now. So basically, you created a Thrush. You created a Man from U.N.C.L.E. You created Spectre. You created this entity that. But are there any individual bad people he comes across?
He does. And as in this instance, some of them are, supposed to be purportedly on the same team that he's on, a Marine colonel, a Navy captain. There's the expected, I'm setting it in 1939 in Berlin. There's the Nazi commandant of a local concentration camp named Elias Fisher. There's a British expat in the book he exists a little bit in the gray. He's one of those guys whose services are up for the highest bidder. He doesn't have any real loyalties other than, who's writing the checks. Named Sir Gerald Thornhill. There's one other character that gets referenced once in relation to Vale, who's known only as Resh, but nobody ever wants to talk about him in front of Frost. And when they do mention his name, it's kind of a slip, but it starts eating at Frost, and we continue that, in the second book, which I'm working on now.
So this is like you're calling it the Unit 12 series. How do you know how far you're going to go with this? Do you have kind of the books kind of mapped out, beginning, middle, end, and you're going to fill in the blanks, or is this take it as it comes?
I've mapped out the next two after this one, and I have the points in history that I want to tie the stories to for the fourth and fifth one.
Wow. So you're all kind of planned out. So you're definitely a plotter when you write, more so than just doing it as ad lib.
Yeah, I guess I should use the term planned out loosely.
Yeah.
I tend to take more of a Mark Graney approach, where he tosses court gentry in the world's most ridiculous situations and lets him fight his way out. I kind of do that with the idea that eventually Captain Frost is going to have to make his way to this point. I have it planned out to that extent. I am definitely a pantser rather than a plotter. My outlines are very, very loose because I'm one of those people that, like, if I try to do the outline like the way I would do for my day job, I get really restricted and the writing starts getting stilted, and then, I don't want to read it.
That's interesting. So you're going to run with this series. Do you have any other types of writing that you're doing on the side, or is one enough for you?
So I've recently started writing. I was talking about this with the guy that I teach with and with my dad last night. So I've recently started writing kind of other genres other than thrillers. With Double Dagger, I've written two modern military thrillers and now this kind of historical fiction spy thriller. But outside of that, every time I've tried to write something outside of that genre under my name, I run into like this weird writer's block where it sounds like I'm trying to write, satire that's trying not to be a military thriller, or I'm trying to write drama that's trying not to be a military thriller, or horror that's trying not to be a thriller. So I recently I created a pen name for myself and just tried to write different things under that pen name just to see if it worked. And so now I've got, on the side under a different name, I've got something that is, part Pirates of the Caribbean, part Game of Thrones, some Stephen King, Ray Bradbury horror stuff, Just out of curiosity, like 2 days ago, I wrote about a 1,500 word short story that sounds a lot like Sons of Anarchy, just to see if I could do it without it sounding stilted or without it sounding like it was trying to avoid being a thriller.
Well, those are all different kinds. The short stories are different than books. So how did you, because I'm doing some short stories too, how do you approach looking at your short stories? You said you started that way. What is it different for you for short stories versus novels?
I think just how much, I think I tend to build like a skeleton first, no matter what I do, whether it's a novel or a short story. And how it ends up is how wild my imagination goes and how much meat I can hang on the skeleton.
It's also you have to use your wording correctly, right? You have such a short space to get the tone across and get the reader to understand the character and the situation, the setting pretty quickly, whereas in a book you have more time. So that's a different type there.
It is, and it's, I guess, oddly for me, my day job, I'm an engineer, so I like to plan, and I like to think things like 7 levels deep, and what if a missile hits here, what if this happens here, what if that happens here, what if there's flooding. When I write, I tend not to do it. It's like that part of my brain shuts off, and like you said, I'm cognizant of the space that I have, but for some reason it just kind of happens. I don't necessarily consciously think about it while I'm writing a short story. They tend to just flow. I suppose my greater effort is when I'm actually, dead set on writing a novel. Then, I have to, okay, what's next?
And violence. Are you thinking about how you write violence or action, or do you have a way of doing that, or is this a fairly graphic book, or are you writing kind of somewhere in between, or is it a little more mild? How do you place that?
I would say that it's probably along the same levels of violence as maybe like a 90s Bond movie, and I have different ways of approaching it. Like in this case, fight scenes, there were occasions when my wife would walk into the room and I would be kind of standing in the middle of the library at home, choreographing my own fight scenes to see if what I had just written made sense.
You're not the only one.
Yeah, just down there shadow boxing in the library. For the combat scenes, being in the Navy and not having, been boots on the ground in a place like Iraq or Afghanistan or, anywhere else for that matter, the combat scenes, I rely a lot on, kind of little hand-drawn sketches of maps to keep track of what character is where in space. I still have one somewhere. Early on in the book, there's an incident between Frost, one of his training officers at Unit 12, and some men who assault them in a hotel room. And I actually had to sketch out the hotel room, and it looks like, the teleprompter from NFL football with arrows pointing to where people ended up during the fight scene. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's all I put into it, other than maybe, research to make sure the weapons are accurate, how the weapons operate are accurate. But I don't get into too much blood and guts in my writing.
Hey, Matt, can I ask you a question on
Sure.
your new character, because books are character. So now into the end of this first book and then on, do you know how he develops, he changes, he gets better or worse throughout time, or is that just kind of happening as you're pantsing it?
I have a general idea, but no defined plans. I do have, I have these little, in my little notebook here, it's actually right next to me, I have these little pink Post-it notes in the notebook that I use to kind of sketch out where Frost is going over the next, few years and few books. And, there's a couple of Post-it notes in there that are, they're very specific with, things he needs to go through, specific changes that need to happen for good or for bad. But that's about as far as I plan ahead for what's going to happen to him.
You found as you're writing that things are changing? I mean, characters got to change, right? So did you find as you wrote, saying, oh.
I did.
He became this.
I did. I found that, in multiple ways that from the point where I first introduced Frost when he's a gung-ho Marine in Shanghai, to being in a brig, to, the end of this first, of Other Than Honorable, I found that he changed in ways that were unexpected to me, that he changed in ways that were kind of unexpected to him. And one of those, like the biggest one of those, is the idea that, he kind of had it stuck in his head that, he's going to be this single guy. He's really not good with the women. He's never going to fall in love. And that's he's going to spend the rest of his life in this brig, introducing a love interest that he can actually talk to without, his stomach turning over. The idea that there's this one human being that he's willing to do anything for, I think actually surprises him, and it comes through towards, the middle, or I'm sorry, the last third of the book. He starts realizing, hey, there is something for me besides just being a Marine or just being part of Unit 12, and it's this woman.
Could have just got a pet and
Carl the dog.
Yeah, just not worry about it. Well, listen. So, do you like to interact with readers or fans or people that like your books or have something to say? Do you have social media? Do you have a website? Where do people find Matt?
So I do have a website. Right now it's just the autographed copies of my books that are for sale. I have social media. I do most of my interactions on there, and frankly, if you look at my social media account, it's mostly like pets, other people's books, and wrestling.
Okay. Well, there you go. We'll get it all.
Just hanging out in places like Barnes & Noble. In a couple weeks, there's a independent bookstore near my home in Maryland that I'm going to hang out, sign books. But most of that, I'll sit there, sign books and sell books, but I get to talk to a lot of people who come in about what they like to read. I think that's the best part. I think that's why I'm teaching at Hopkins now, too, is I like talking to people about, how they write, what they see happening when they write, and how I write.
Well, that's good. Well, we're going to have all of that up on our website. We'll have your book, and we'll have your all your website and all that sort of stuff, so people can find you easily. And the book comes out March 11th. Again, the book, Other Than Honorable, and it's Matt Hardman. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
This has been a production of the House of Mystery Radio Show. To find out more about our show, guests, or hosts, go to our website at houseofmysteryradio.com.